And we're live. I'm having my second discussion with Eric Hovind. On the panel, we have Wayne Filmer, an old Earth creationist, and Steve McRae, agnostic apatheist. And is JoJo here? Nope, I don't think he's here. And Eric Hovind, of course. Now, Eric, a few days ago, I made a video. It's called the mitochondrial problem for creationists, and I took the various. No, wait. Before I begin, you do know what mitochondrial DNA is, right? Before I.
I'm familiar with it. Yes, I wouldn't be an expert in it.
Okay, it's a little it's the DNA within the circular chromosome of the mitochondria. Now, it's very good at telling the story of recent evolution within various taxons, or taxa. Now, the reason I bring it up is because I compared the various sequences. Say I took the maned wolf and the dog, the domestic dog, and I compared them. You get an 89% similar. I'm pretty sure you would say the maned wolf and the dog are the same kind, right?
Yeah, I'd refer to those as the same kind of animal originally. Kind is more of the family level. When you look at the classifications, the modern day classification system, obviously our modern classification system isn't based on the biblical classification system, which would be different. But yeah, I'd put it at about the family level.
Okay, great. Now, when I got an 89% similarity for the mitogenomic sequences. Now, when you compare humans and you get a 91%. When you compare humans and gorillas, you get a 90%. So what I'm wondering is, how can we say the maned wolf and the dog, the domestic dog, are the same kind, not the human chimps and gorillas, when we find higher sequence similarity?
Yeah, I'd say what we're doing there is we are looking for what is similar and saying that similarity proves common ancestry. So, you know, again, it's when you look at any piece of evidence, you're bringing up mitochondrial DNA. When you look at any piece of evidence at all, we are all going to interpret that evidence through a worldview, through what we already believe to be true. So if I come to the evidence thinking that God created the heavens and the earth, I'm going to look at that and go, wow, that's great evidence that God created the heavens and the earth, and then he made all the kinds of animals, and he told them to go out and fill the earth, so he gave them the genetic diversity. He gave them the pre-programmed, pre-ability to go out and fulfill and fill all these different crazy environments that we live in today. So you can have the genetic ability to eventually get to where you can live in sub-zero temperatures in Alaska, or you can live in 130-degree temperatures in the desert. You know, the rabbits that can do both. So I look at it and I see this evidence and I go, wow, great evidence of an amazing designer. If I believed in evolution, I would look at this evidence and say, wow, great evidence of common ancestry. Look at this evidence of common ancestry. The problem is not the evidence. The problem is, what do I believe before I ever even get to the evidence? What was my hypothesis or my presupposition before examining the evidence? The very first thing you do in the scientific method is come up with a hypothesis. What do we think happened here? Here's my question, here's my hypothesis. So if the hypothesis is evolution, you can take all the evidence we see today and say, hey, this points towards evolution. I look at the evidence and say, this points towards creation. This shows us that there's a fundamental issue that we need to figure out here. And the fundamental issue we need to figure out is, can we determine which hypothesis would be correct? Can we determine which starting point or presupposition would end up being correct? Another just kind of issue with the mitochondrial evidence that you're looking at, they are discovering genetic similarity between animals. But we do need to understand that that should be expected. In the last couple of years, they've been doing some unbelievable research in what's in a field of science known as epigenetics. Now, I am by no means an expert, but I sure do love reading about epigenetics. Epi means above, and then genetics is our genome. So what is it that's above our genes or controls our genome? What is it that controls all that DNA? And what they used to believe was more like the junk DNA. Now they're discovering that this supposed junk DNA is actually above, or it's the brains for all the DNA. Just a simple example, a cell in my liver and a cell in my muscle, as few as those be, I'd love to have a few more, but those cells genetically are the same. But it's the epigenetics, the genetics above the DNA sequence, that actually tells one cell to be a liver cell, the other to be a muscle cell. So when we look at epigenetics, and I challenge you to start looking up some of the stuff on epigenetics, and I know they'll still interpret it with an evolutionary worldview, but it is destroying the entire idea of natural selection that would lead you to these conclusions of, ape to man, evolution type things. So there's a couple comments for you on that.
Okay, now if I can address that. Epigenetics, it's not, it controls gene expression. It doesn't tell you which cells to be which cells. I believe you're Hox genes, not epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically, okay, this gene is expressed, this gene isn't. When you DNA methylation, when you have in eukaryotes, you have what's called a methyl group, CH3, is that right? CH3, yeah. It'll bind to the cytosine, and it'll essentially tell this gene, okay, you're not going to be transcripted, so it's off. Okay, that's epigenetics. Now, epigenetics, it doesn't really form a problem or evolution at all. Now, you brought up junk DNA. Now, there are certain sequences of DNA which absolutely have no function. Now, they're not regulators. Now, only around 7% of what we consider pseudogenes actually have some sort of regulatory function. Now, I'll take, for example, the GLOP gene.
Let me just stop you right there and go, when you say we found some DNA that has no function, you got to understand, to make a statement like that, I think is the absurdity of pride. Because how many times have we discovered something and we said this has no purpose, including many things in our DNA that we said has no purpose. So it's real difficult to let that kind of slide by when you say, this much or this DNA has no purpose. And I think it would be wiser for you, this is from my humble perspective, is to say, you know what, we don't know what this does yet. Just FYI. And when you talk about gene expression, the issue that we come up with is the genes that make up my liver cell and my muscle cell are the same genes. It's the epigenetics. It's what tells certain sequences to turn on and off that make it either a liver cell or a muscle cell. So it's the expression of the genome. It's the expression of that DNA that's telling it what to be, which cell to make. It's the exact same information. It's just the epigenetics has told it what to turn on and turn off. And what they're discovering is that those epigenetic, what is turned on and what is turned off, those sequences are actually not just determined by our information, they're determined by exterior influences. They're determined by the food we eat, our attitude, the environment that we live in. So anyway, just to throw that out there real quick.
Okay, now, what you said, we don't know what function. Well, we do know what function. Take, for example, I mentioned the GLOP gene. Now, we do know a function, but not in the whole dry-nosed primates. The purpose of the gene is for the biosynthesis of vitamin C. Now, in humans, we're missing the protoregion, which is what RNA polymerase will bind to begin transcription. And we're missing exon 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 11. So it's not that we don't know a function, it's that there is no function. It can't work. There's no promoter to begin transcription, and it's missing exons, which are coding regions. So it's not going to work. It's not that we don't know it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear a question there. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but the way you said, we have this junk DNA, we know what this does, and you're right to say that it doesn't have like for example, the way our bodies cannot form vitamin C the way a goat still has that ability to do that. So we can understand that. Yes, I get that.
Okay. So when we see a functional ortholog and a non-functional ortholog, it's not really. It makes it much easier to tell. Okay, this does not work in this organism, or it works in this organism. So we have a functional ortholog to compare it to, so we know that it does not work.
Right. I'm still confused as to how you would say this is evidence of. Again, we're going to look everything you bring up here. I'm going to say, wow, you know what that proves? That proves that we're broken. We're getting worse. We're not getting better. That proves what the Bible says. And you're going to say, no, 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 that proves common ancestry. That proves. So I'm kind of confused as to what the point on that is.
I'll explain why this schoologene is evidence for common ancestry. Now, I'm sure you would agree that mutations are heritable. Like,
are mutations inherited? Yes, they can be passed down. But a lot of the, quote, mutations that are being passed down, we're discovering, are more epigenetic than simply DNA sequences. That's what I find interesting and what I think blows a hole in any kind of natural selection or just simply gene transferring.
Mutations aren't epigenetic. Epigenetics has to do with the gene being turned off and on.
Right.
Oh my God, I almost
yeah,
fell.
but there are, like for example, there are mutations that that will allow somebody more likelihood of getting cancer. And what they're discovering, and again, I don't know if you've been studying this. I just went to a seminar last week. I filmed it. I'll be putting it up on our website, creationtoday.org, of Dr. Mancha talking through epigenetics and talking through what this really means and how. Even including some of his own testimony of patients that he's had, where he has prescribed certain things, and this ended up turning off a certain gene that caused his patients to get a cancer. So, yeah, there are mutations that are more epigenetic than mistakes in the DNA. There's a couple great videos out there. I haven't been able to post them yet, but there's a couple great videos out there on this idea that what we used to think are simply mutations, we're now learning are more epigenetic changes.
Okay, now when we're talking, when we're talking cancer, we're talking a mutation in somatic cells. When I mention heritable mutation, I'm talking germline mutations, not somatic mutations, which cause cancer. Can cause cancer.
Okay, I still go back to my main point. You're looking at something that is a mutation and saying that this can lead to macro or major or big evolution of changing from one kind of animal to another. And just to kind of help bring this conversation to where it's going to end up going, however long it takes to get there, what evidence do we have of one kind of animal changing into a different kind of animal? What mutations do we have that show a dog is changed into something that is now no longer a dog or of the family dog?
I was going to figure you were going to make that point. Now, are you familiar with cladistics?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Cladistics?
Are you familiar with cladistics?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, so you get that. So you understand Mayer's law of monophyly, right?
I couldn't quote it to you, that's for sure.
Okay, essentially what Mayer's law of monophyly is when something enters, when a clade founded, right, the ancestor, the descendants of that clade will still remain within that clade. So, which is why humans are still considered apes, and apes are hadrinos, and drinos primates are primates, and primates are mammals, and mammals are synapsids, and etc.
Right. You still.
So we can't have a.
You still, though, you have to admit that you are looking at the evidence from the evolutionary perspective in order to get or come up with the concept of cladistics. So you still have the same problem. We're not getting to the root of the problem. What you're giving me is more evidence and saying this evidence is evidence of evolution. And I'm saying, again, just to kind of head it off where we're going to go after we go through, look, this has 4 limbs, and this has jaws, and this has, after you go through all these different things and say, look at these similarities and look at the cladistics of this and map it out, you're going to say this proves evolution. I'm going to say that proves a common designer, right? Isn't that where this concludes every single time?
Well, no. Well, first off, you could easily falsify evolution. One model has a potential falsification. Now, for example, if we humans and chimps were, oh my God, I just dropped. Humans and chimps, say, well, no, I don't like that example. Say we found a mammal with feathers. That would falsify evolution.
No, and that's where I say you're wrong there. It would not falsify evolution. Evolution is the fog that fits any landscape of evidence that is out there. Many evolutionists, that's a quote, as a matter of fact, from an evolutionist. It is a fog that will fit any landscape, no matter what the evidence. You find feathers on a mammal, and they're going to say, voila, well, this is is something that started to evolve this way, and then, or it was halfway in between, and then, it died out. It didn't make it. Natural selection took over. So, I mean, think about it. Back in the early 2000s, when Mary Schweitzer discovered soft tissue in dinosaur bone, and then they discovered red blood cells in dinosaur bones, she admitted, look, this is really bad for the evolution worldview, the whole idea of the millions of years. She said we can either question the age of these, or we can question how fossilization takes place. But guess what they never questioned? They never questioned the age. They only questioned how fossilization takes place. So, when you say there's evidence that could be found that could debunk evolution, I go, no, there's not, because we have found evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence, and it doesn't matter. Evolutionists still go, well, that fits, and creationists go, yep, that fits ours too. So, again, we're not getting to the root of the problem, and that is which hypothesis can make sense as a hypothesis without even looking at the evidence.
Isiah, can I ask a clarifying question while you're having?
No, I'm going to go in.
Yeah, you look at your phone. Yeah, so.
No.
Yeah.
Now, have you read Schweitzer's paper, right? Both of them, the one preservation of the soft tissue and the one on the actual discovery. Oh my God, I keep leaving.
Yeah, how she believes that iron is what is responsible for the preservation. And
yes, have you read that one and the one on the original discovery?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually got to do an interview with Mark Armitage, and Mark Armitage did a great job of bringing out. He actually went and found some more soft tissue dinosaur material, and it was a Triceratops horn. I actually did an interview with him. He's on our Creation Today show at creationtoday.org. You can just go there and look the interview up with Mark Armitage, and we did an extended interview with him, and it was all about this whole idea of what Mary Schweitzer wrote and his response to that. So I'd say there are plenty of responses. The question is, what is the peer review going to allow to get through? Because peer review is nothing more than majority opinion if it comes right down to it.
Well, hold on. Now, have you read? I'm not sure if you read Schweitzer's work. Now, what she did was profound. Now, she took hemoglobin and treated ostrich, I believe it was blood vessels with hemoglobin, which will, follows a chain down to iron. Now, when she treated ostrich blood vessels with hemoglobin and left them out in a room temperature room for 2 years, she found that ostrich blood vessels not treated with hemoglobin lasted longer we're talking a factor of over 200. Now, I'm being quite conservative with these numbers because Schweitzer, she ended them. She could have kept going.
I lost you, or unless that was...
I think it's breaking up. Isiah, are you breaking up? Because I keep
Hold on.
dropping out.
Am I breaking up? Okay.
Yeah,
Is it,
and
am I
let me,
doing
like I
better?
said, let me know. I'm sitting here and I'm taking some notes. There are some questions that I want to get clarified if possible from
Okay. Am I
when we get a
breaking
chance.
up? Am I clear now?
No, you're good now. You're good now. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, basically what I said was the collagen treated with hemoglobin lasts to 243, which is the number I came up with, times longer than that not treated with hemoglobin. And that's being conservative because Schweitzer stopped the experiment. She could have kept going, so my numbers are actually quite conservative. Did that
Right. So
break up?
I'm still coming to the same conclusion though that I've said multiple times, and that is, okay, so here we got an issue now, and again, Mark Armitage addressed that, and I wish I could remember exactly what he said on that, on how iron does not preserve. It's not doing what they said. There are other cases where there's not iron, so I'd need to go back and refresh my memory on that. But and by the way, our website at creationtoday.org, if you use that search feature and just search in Mary Schweitzer or dinosaur soft tissue or blood in dinosaur bones, there's a bunch of great articles that come up that actually address that very issue. But
There,
the problem is it continues to say, okay, what she's doing is saying, okay, I'm not going to question the age of these. Now I must find a mechanism in order to preserve it. Does that make sense?
no, that's not what she did. What she found the extra iron oxide on the heme, it was heme,
Heme.
and she said, okay, heme. Oh my God, heme. And she said, okay, why is this here? Could this have something to do with the preservation? And when she did her experiment, she said, okay, yes, this has profound effects on preservation.
And there's actually been a study just recently that actually confirmed those results, by the way, Isiah. I don't know.
Yes, there was. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up. There was another. I forgot. What was it? Another reptile. It was a reptile. That's all I remember. Where they did find iron oxide and soft tissue, confirming exactly what Schweitzer said.
Yeah, so now we're back to the basic problem. This evidence can be used for creation or it can be used for evolution. So we've gotten nowhere in our real determination of, okay, who's right, who's wrong.
Well, can I say that
both you guys real quick?
Okay.
Even though they both can be explained by creation or evolution, in the court of law, we don't go with what's possible or, what they both can explain it. Which model can explain it to the most which model can best explain the evidence in a way that is the most reasonable? Because there's no doubt that both of you guys probably could explain it, but which model would be the most reasonable possibility?
Right, and so that's why now we can examine our hypothesis. Now we can back up and say, which hypothesis is even reasonable? Is the evolutionary hypothesis even reasonable? Is that a reasonable starting point? And that's what I love to talk about, is the presuppositions of our hypothesis. What do we believe to be true about our hypothesis? So if, like, for example, an agnostic worldview or an atheist worldview, I would go and examine that worldview itself, a strictly material or naturalistic worldview, and examine that worldview and say, can that worldview make sense of reality? Can that worldview even account for the fact that we are looking at evidence? Because we all agree we're looking at evidence. Now, which worldview can account for us actually looking at that evidence?
Isiah, can I jump in here this first a few seconds here?
All right. Yeah, sure.
You asked something about epigenetics earlier, real quick, and I just wanted to clarify here. When you said something to the effect that epigenetics is somehow violating natural selection or related to natural selection, I was kind of confused. Epigenetics, when you have, like he was explaining, a methylation, okay, like the cytosine gets methylated, that is a modification to the allele. And if the allele is passed on through heredity, that is what evolution is, obviously, because we know that evolution is a change of allelic frequency. So the modification of the allele being methylated by epigenetic factors is a part of evolution theory. So it's part of the modern evolutionary synthesis. It's actually more extended, but it's still modern evolutionary synthesis. So you had said something earlier about epigenetics somehow not fitting in with the evolutionary paradigm, and I was just kind of confused of where that was going with that real quick.
Well, the problem is, and here's what I was saying is Darwinian evolution. What epigenetics is showing us is that Lamarckism, which was really left behind, when Darwinism came along, everybody was like, okay, Darwin got it, and we just kind of left Lamarckism behind, saying that the environment has a factor in this, and Darwin's theory of natural selection and evolution brought about this idea that no, it's just our DNA, and then it's mutations in the DNA, and that's what science has run with for the last 100 and almost 50 years. So what we've done, though, is we're discovering now, we left Lamarckism too soon. The environment does have a much bigger role in our in the genetics than we thought. It really can turn on and off certain switches in our DNA that either suppress or allow for the what's the word when it shows the
Gene
characteristic.
Gene
yes.
expression. Mm-hmm.
When it does express it, correct.
Yeah, well, we have the neo-Lamarckian, and that again is something incorporated in the modern evolutionary synthesis. The Darwinian model hasn't been used, like you said, for 150 years of just mutations and natural selection. That is an antiquated model.
Oh no, and it is not. That is still very much out there in the sciences today.
Well, no, actually, the modern evolutionary synthesis is basically the theory of evolution, the modern version of it. And that takes into account many more things than just mutations and natural selection. One of the things it does take into account is epigenetic modification, which would be exactly what Isiah was talking about, the methylization of.
Okay, when you say though that Darwinian evolution is antiquated, when you say that it's old, you're gonna have to help me out there, man, because how far back do you think it was that they left this?
150 years.
No. Oh my word, no, guys. They are still teaching in the textbooks now that natural selection and mutations is what causes evolution.
Well, no, that's not the only
take
factor.
into account the idea of epigenetics. P.Z. Myers recently said that epigenetics is the future of what kids are going to be studying. He said by next year, a third of the kids going into genetics are going to be studying epigenetics.
Yes, and it's incorporated in the modern evolutionary synthesis. Natural selection and mutations are just a part of the modern evolutionary synthesis.
But when you say that that was left 150 years ago, I go, dude, you're dreaming, man. That's the typical, the Darwinian evolution. They tried to come up with different ones, but that has been taught for the last 150 years. It's not something that you can call antiquated.
Well, no.
Go ahead.
Darwinian evolution isn't taught anymore. It's been replaced by neo-Darwinism, which was then replaced by the modern evolutionary synthesis.
Correct.
Not neo-Darwinism. The Darwinian mechanism is. Darwin got some things right, but there was more to it, a lot more to it. As you mentioned, the epigenetic factors. I'm sure. Are you familiar with epi-alleles?
Again, just vaguely familiar. It's not like I've studied these things. I haven't. I couldn't name to you exactly what all the different chemicals are that are acting on them to allow for the gene expression.
Okay, so when you have an epi, you have a DNA methylation between two identical genes, which it basically. How am I going to put this? An epi-allele is basically the DNA methylation differs between the genes, forming a new allele. Now, this is a change in allelic frequency in a population, which is what evolution is. It's incorporated into evolution. It doesn't.
Okay, so now we get to the root of it. Okay, if that's all evolution is, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know that's not all evolution is.
Yes, that is all it is.
No, okay, so tell me, how is that going to turn a banana into something else? How is that going to turn, a dog into an elephant?
It's not. It never will. A dog becoming a banana, that would debunk evolution. That right there.
Well, you at some point believe the plants turned into animals or something along those lines.
No. Plants are a separate line of phylogeny. We didn't come from plants.
So you're saying at some point long ago and far away, this amoeba that came to life out of non-life, abiogenesis, took place, giving rise to all of life that we have today, and somehow this original single-celled organism changed into everything that we have today. So I'm saying, okay, that's what you don't have evidence of.
No, it wasn't just one cell. It was most likely a group of cells. Are you familiar with horizontal gene transfer?
Yeah. Again, now we are in the realm of science fiction.
Horizontal gene transfer is science fiction?
No, to say that a group of cells, formed life billions of years ago with no guided process, this is just what they did, to me is, I'm not trying to be mean here, but it's just the height of foolishness.
No. Basically, when you have, I mentioned a group of cells because what you have between single-celled organisms is what's called horizontal gene transfer, rather than just vertical gene transfers, where you get for the most part, a neat phylogeny.
Explaining how it happens, which is what you're doing, how these things, doesn't explain where it came from, or what gave it the information to be able to do that, or who programmed it, or you're looking at how and not origin or cause, or you're ignoring what I would call the elephant in the room.
Eric, do you accept
the origins of life? All right.
Eric, do you accept that evolutionary theory? And I understand that you're saying evolution and evolutionary theory are kind of the same thing, and I'll grant for the sake of argument that they are, but they're not. But are you? When I say that evolutionary theory is a regressionary model, that means that we're looking at observations today, and we're saying, okay, this is what we see. Now we need to come up with a model to explain it, and that model goes back to what's called a last common ancestor, and then it goes back to a universal last common ancestor. So the model that we're coming up with doesn't start with the prebiotic condition, or even the abiogenesis. It's starting with what we're seeing for biodiversity, and then we're working our way backwards. Okay, that's why it's called a regressionary model.
Right, but you're looking at that from a perspective in order to even come up with that concept, in order to even come up with the very idea that we need to go back in common ancestry. You already have a preconceived idea. You already have I'll call it a worldview in order to even postulate the very idea itself. Would you admit that?
No, because it's based upon speciation. And speciation, we know that occurs. And if speciation occurs, then there's no hard cap or line of demarcation when speciation stops. So we can do a regressionary analysis based upon deductive reasoning, saying that we could go back to pretty much the universal ancestor using speciation.
There is our logical flaw. There is the logical flaw to say, because we see speciation happening now, therefore there are no limits, and we can go all the way back to a common ancestor. That, my friend, is what we see is science. What we see is speciation. What we do not see and have never observed. Science, remember, science is things we can see, test, and demonstrate. What we can observe, the knowledge we gain through observation and study. We never see anything beyond speciation. So for somebody to hypothesize that speciation leads to all this macro, this big changing and evolution all the way back to a common ancestor of everything, again, we are outside the realm of science. We're into science fiction.
Okay, now I'm going to ask a question. Are you familiar with teosynite grass?
Nope.
Okay, it's a little grass. Around 5,000 years ago, this neat little grass, due to humans domesticating it, is now corn. Okay, are teosynite grass and corn, are they the same kind?
Yeah. Again, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. I can tell you where to look it up. If I go to creationtoday.org and I do a search on it, I guarantee I'll give you a good answer on that. But I'm not. I just said I'm not familiar with that. So, but if we can, what are we using to trace it back to a common ancestry? What are we using right now that's taking it back to say? Are we using real science? Or are we using historical science? Are we using observational science? Just give me that real quick.
All right.
We can take that grass today. We can take that grass today and turn it into corn over a period of time.
No. We can't. That would violate evolution.
But it
You
did
can't
happen.
turn it to graph.
It did happen in the
Yes,
past.
it did happen around 5,000 years ago. Now,
Okay, so hang on.
the reason we know
I'm confused now. You're saying we cannot repeat this process, but it did happen.
yes.
Okay, you are outside the realm of science, my friend. Science is things that we can
hold on,
and demonstrate and that are repeatable.
Now, are you aware that teocyanite can breed with? I don't know if breed's the right word. Teocyanite can fertilize grass. I mean, not can fertilize corn.
Okay, like I said, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. I'm just telling you that big picture thinking. Zoom out just a little bit. Look at the big picture.
Well,
The
Eric,
big picture is you're saying that it did something 5,000 years ago that we can't repeat today.
repeatability has to do with experimentation, not events that have happened historically. Like
Well, how in the world do you know that it happened historically then?
Well, we have the genetic evidence for
No, you
that
are
we know corn is essentially a.
You are reading that. You are reading your story into the evidence, and this is what we deal with all the time. And this is honestly, this is what's very frustrating for somebody like me, because here we see science. Now we have an observation of what we think happened with that, and what I consistently hear an evolutionary perspective do is they erase the line and pretend like their story is part of the science. The story of what they read into it is not necessarily part of the science. You know, and I don't know if you guys have heard on our tapes, I say all the time, two people can stand on the edge of Grand Canyon, and they can come to totally different conclusions about what took place there. One person says, wow, look what a little bit of water did over a lot of time. Another person says, wow, look what a whole lot of water did over a little bit of time. So we have a fact. The Grand Canyon exists. How did it get there? Well, it depends if you want the evolution story or the creation story. And what evolutionists do is they erase the line between their story, a little bit of water over a long period of time, and the fact, the Grand Canyon exists. And you're doing the exact same thing here. You're giving me the science and saying, therefore, this grass evolved into corn. Now, it won't do it again, but it happened historically.
Now, hold on, if I may bring up an example. Are you familiar with Neanderthals and Denisovans?
Neanderthals and what?
Denisovans or Denisovans.
I'm familiar with Neanderthals. I'm not sure what.
Okay, Denisovans. It's an extinct hominid. It's a human. Now it's genetically distinct from both the humans and Neanderthals, but we do know that this Denisovan did breed with modern Melanesians. Now we have never seen a Denisovan breed with a modern human, and we don't need to know that this occurred because we have the DNA evidence. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I would say Neanderthals were humans, and I'd say they're all part of the human race. So I wouldn't have any problem with that.
Yes. And we've never seen one breed with a modern human.
Well, I'm not strictly an empiricist. Are you an empiricist? I wouldn't say that I have to. I mean, there is no solution for empiricism. The idea that if we don't see it or have evidence, if we can't see, test it, or demonstrate it, therefore we can't believe it. That's not me. That's the naturalist worldview. That's not mine.
Well, actually, what he's saying is we've seen evidence that there was breeding going on. We cannot recreate that breeding, but we've seen the evidence to suggest that they did breed, even though they are humans. Neanderthals are a type of human, obviously.
Now, could somebody look at that and say, hey, I don't think they bred, and there's another explanation for why we have these similarities in genomes or DNA, or why these things. Could somebody look at that and hypothesize a totally different scenario? Absolutely. No. Yeah, they could.
But what model would work other than vertical gene transfer?
Yeah, that's the key thing is the vertical gene transfer, is because you're having ancestral population diverge into speciation, and you can linearly regress the speciation events from two daughter populations to an ancestral one, for example, like allopatric or sympatric speciation. So what we're positing is not something outside of the realm of science, because it is science. We know speciation occurs. And if we know speciation occurs, then we know that this continues on backwards, unless you could posit a reason why it just arbitrarily suddenly stops. So that's why we look at this evolutionary model. We say, hey, how did these species today get here? Well, they are results of speciation events over a very, very long time, and then we can look at the phylogenetic tree and see how many times these speciation events have occurred. That is what the modeling is.
Yeah, I get it, and that's where I say, okay, but we're looking at it, coming up with a model for how it could happen or how it might have happened over a long period of time. Whereas a creationist would look at it and say, how did this happen? How did God design in it the ability to create this genetic diversity very, very quickly?
I'm going to turn this back over to Isiah real quick, but let me ask you this quick. So are you saying, though, that if we're both looking at the same evidence, then the evidence for evolution is just as valid as the creationist model? If we're both looking at the same evidence?
I don't believe that. I do believe we're all looking at the same evidence. I think the evolution model ignores or suppresses different evidences that we see today. And, I mean, that's frustrating for me as I travel and give evidence after evidence of, okay, symbiotic relationships and the number of people on the planet and how many people would be here in 3 million years if mankind evolved 3 million years ago, and how many fossils we should have on planet Earth if Earth has been here for millions of years, and you know what, there are so many things that evolution, it will account for them. It will figure out a way. It will, I call it a rescuing device. It will rescue its theory one way or another. So that's what makes me go, okay, we have to realize we're both looking at the same evidence and coming to opposite conclusions. Why are we doing this? Why are we coming to two totally different conclusions? That's why I go, it doesn't really do me a lot of good to argue with you guys over who's got the better evidence, because we all have the same evidence. And you're saying, well, this evidence is interpreted this proves evolution. And I'm looking at it, and a whole bunch of creation scientists out there, tons of them, are going, I'm looking at all this evidence, and this is evidence of creation. So that turns it into a fruitless endeavor to consistently go after the evolution worldview versus creation worldview from an evidentiary standpoint. People have been doing this for years. This will continue to happen for years. That's why I say, well, whose original hypothesis? If we started with the no God hypothesis, does that make sense? Does a no God starting point make sense? And I say, no, it doesn't.
Why is it a hypothesis? If it's a regressionary model that you actually agreed that we look at the evidence today, and that's the observations we are making. That is, in science, we observe things.
Right, okay, let me stop right there and say, okay, here's my question. Here's my question. If I started getting down to the philosophy of your science, this is where we would hit the problem. The philosophy behind we are observing things. Mm-hmm. This right here, the philosophy behind that is, for example, the number one thing in science, the uniformity of nature. How do we know that nature is uniform? Whose starting point gives us uniformity of nature? We're doing science and we assume that nature is uniform. If I boil water at 212 degrees today, under the same conditions, tomorrow it will boil at 212 degrees. So why is there uniformity in nature? I would say that is based on the Creator saying He holds all things together. If I started with an evolutionary or a no God, more of an atheistic hypothesis, now I can't guarantee uniformity in nature. Now I don't have a philosophy behind my observations. We also, with that philosophy, when you look at the philosophy, we can't know that we are even observing, because how do we know that we're making these observations? We say, well, I've observed that I'm making these observations. Well, that's a circular argument. Your senses of observation are validating your senses of observation. Now we're down to a circular argument.
Well, actually, it's an assumption. The assumption that the universe exists is a basal assumption that we'll make. When we talk about the universe,
let me ask you this: Are you granting it is possible that assumption could be wrong?
That's why it's called an assumption. Yes.
Okay, so you're granting, what you're telling me is right now, while we talk, you're telling me it is possible that the universe does not exist.
It's an assumption we have to make. Okay, but let me ask. Hang on, let me 1 second.
Let me do the other side of it, because this is what I feel like you don't ever want to admit. You know, not you individually, but I go, would you be willing to admit that because that is an assumption?
It is an assumption, yes.
You have to look at the other side and say, I am speaking to you right now, telling you it's possible that that assumption is wrong and the universe does not exist.
Okay, and you can believe that, but let me ask you this:
No, is that what you believe? Don't throw it back to me. I don't believe that.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, then I want you back to Isiah because he's actually his thing here.
Steve,
but I think
real quick,
I have one quick question for Eric, and then I'll turn it over. If we don't accept uniformitarianism, okay, or that things are consistent, that we could have no predictive modeling. And predictive modeling cannot exist unless we make a basal assumption that there's a consistency on the laws of physics, that there'll be same today than they are tomorrow and yesterday. Okay.
So now I got a question. You are basing that on the assumption, and I would say your assumption is a Christian worldview assumption. The laws of physics are immaterial, they are universal, and they are unchanging. What worldview can account for that? Can the evolutionary worldview, which says everything is always evolving, possibly even the laws of physics?
Well, evolution is not a worldview. Evolution is a biological thing.
Well, and that's where I'd say you're not being honest with yourself and saying a worldview has to be cohesive. You have to get the universe here. So when I go on that, I say, look, the laws of physics are universal, immaterial, and unchanging. The God of the Bible is universal, immaterial, and unchanging. I've got an ability to account for the laws that we use today. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to jump ahead and say, okay, I'm just going to make that assumption. I'm saying, hang on, that assumption isn't possible without the God of the Bible.
Well, it is. It is.
Steve, if I can.
Yes, go ahead. It's called a properly basic belief, and we can actually do that. But go ahead, Judy.
Eric, what do you mean when you say that your worldview can account for what you said the laws of physics are? What do you mean by an account?
Accounting, in other words, we have. If you start with, I don't look at the laws of physics and say, hey, these are universal, immaterial, and unchanging. I need to figure out how can I got an idea. I'll have a universal, immaterial, unchanging God, and that can give an account for these universal, immaterial, unchanging laws. I say, if you don't start with the universal, immaterial, unchanging God of the Bible, you can't get universal, immaterial, unchanging laws of physics, of science, of math, of morality, of logic. You can't get anything. You can't get cohesive thought processes if you don't start with the God of the Bible.
Well, I don't think that answered my question. How do you account? What do you mean by account?
Okay, you tell me. Well,
I know what I mean when I say account for something. I'm curious what you mean because I don't quite follow yet.
And a way to show that this is valid. You tell me, based on an evolutionary and always changing, the universe came into existence from nothing for no reason. Based on this worldview, how do you account for the universal, immaterial, unchanging laws?
All right. Well, the evolutionary worldview does not incorporate cosmology, so I don't think that's going to.
Absolutely.
Well, no.
What you just said.
Model is the evolutionary model is in biology. The evolution. In a colloquial sense, can mean simply change over time. In which case, sure, you can say that things in space or things in politics, things in sex, all these things change over time. But when we talk about evolution, we're talking about in biology. We're talking about, well, I think probably someone already mentioned it before, allele frequencies changing within biological populations, or the overarching model that explains how life, diversified over time. It doesn't include cosmology.
That is a cop-out. That is I don't want to have to deal with all these problems behind the curtain. I'm going to leave them behind the curtain, and I'm just going to deal with life as it exists today. Evolutionists all the time have admitted.
This is just a correction of definitions. This is just a correction of definitions. I actually do believe that. Well, I don't think the universe came from nothing. In fact, I don't know anyone who thinks the universe came from nothing. But I do think the universe came about. Let me put it a better way. I do believe we live in a godless universe. So I would go that far.
Right.
I don't think there's a God in the universe.
So how do you account for the universal immaterial laws of logic, science, math, and morality?
Well, for logic, are you talking about the classical 3 principles of logic?
Does logic
identity,
change?
non-contradiction, is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Right. Well, those are properly basic. If I'm going to account for it, I'm going to need something more basic.
An assumption.
Well, no. Well, the law of identity. What is more basic than the proposition P equals P? There's nothing more basic. If I'm going to account for that, I'm going to need something more basic than P equals P. And God is not simpler than P equals P. I can get P equals P without positing a God. It doesn't help me in any way. So why would I posit it to account for it? In fact, why can't I simply posit another God behind your God to account for your God? And we can have turtles all the way down. So it doesn't really help me. It doesn't help me understand anything. It doesn't account for anything. It's just an assertion on top of one that it's not necessary.
Hey, JD, let me show you why you can't. How do you know that your reasoning is valid?
What do you mean by reasoning?
Hold on, JD.
Your ability to think and reason is a valid reasoning. How do you know? Well, let me put it this way. Are there people in our world that cannot reason correctly? They cannot come to valid conclusions.
The people who reason certain things and they come to the wrong conclusion. Well, yeah, we're all like that, aren't we?
Are there people that are strapped to a bed in a psych ward, but they think they're running around in the forest right now?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. How do you know you're not one of those people?
I can't. That's one of the limitations of the mind. I could assume. And in fact, the best way to put it would be, I have a properly basic belief that I'm not one of those people, but I could, of course, still be wrong. Let's think about properly basic beliefs. That we assume them because we have to, but that doesn't mean they're actually true. I can assume that I'm not a brain of that. Well, I mean, I can assume I'm not in a brain of that. That doesn't mean I'm right. I'm just assuming it because I have no reason to think otherwise.
So what can you not be wrong about? What do you know to be absolutely true?
Well, there's actually a long list. I know I'm not omnipotent. I know I'm not omniscient. I know I'm not God. That would be a pretty easy one, I think. I know that I exist, that I am having experiences.
And how do you know these things?
That I'm having experiences, I can't be wrong about that. It's self-evident.
You just said you could, though. That's the problem. You just said...
Well, from your perspective... I could be. From your perspective, I couldn't exist, but from my perspective, that I exist and have experiences is not something I can be wrong about. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Don't throw. Listen, JD, you just threw your worldview on me, saying that I'm the one who believes that you could not exist. I didn't say that, JD. Rewind the tape.
I'm sorry. Maybe you misheard me. I didn't say that you would think I don't. We're having a conversation, so either I don't think I'm talking to myself. So I'm pretty sure you're there. I'm pretty sure I'm here.
But JD, from a first person perspective, hang on, JD. You're the one who said you could be strapped to a bed in a psych ward. You could be a brain in the vat. So this is I need to hold up the mirror and say, JD, just let me hold this up. I need you to look in the mirror of what you said. This isn't what I claimed. This is what you claimed.
Eric, do you have a reason that he is, though, Eric? Do you have a reason to believe that JD is trapped in bed?
If I may, Steve.
I'm opposing his worldview for what it is. It's his worldview that says, these are a basic assumption. I cannot guarantee these. I could be the brain in the vat. The universe, well, you didn't say, but somebody else said, the universe couldn't exist. These are not, my worldview says, I know we're here, and God is the fear of the Lord really is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom. And that gets me back to a biblical worldview that says, hey, all of you guys know that God exists. You know He's real, but you are suppressing that truth because of unrighteousness. And that's really what it comes down to. And every time I have a real, honest conversation with an atheist or an agnostic or a skeptic, and I say, I was at University of West Florida last week, and I said to some guys that kept saying, hey, I don't want to believe this. I said, can I venture to go out and tell you why you don't believe? They said, yeah. I said, the reason you don't believe is because of sin in your life. You don't want there to be a God. You don't want to be accountable to His rules. I said, would that basically sum it up? And on all three occasions, they said, yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Okay, Eric, well, there are two things have to do with the brain of that bit. One is that it's not logically impossible does not mean it is metaphysically possible or that it is the case. Simply that I'm admitting that I'm a fallible human being and there are all kinds of things that could be the case that I'm not aware of. I don't think they are. In fact, I think it's probably impossible for that to be the case. But I cannot completely with absolute certainty rule it out. Right. Which is very different than saying that it's definitely the case or that it's likely.
But now we get to, can we have absolute...
Oh, I'm sorry. I mentioned one point. I was going to mention the second point. The second point is I can get to where you are simply by assuming that it's not the case. Assuming a God to assume it's not the case, well, that also violates Occam's razor. You don't need the God to do it. You simply assume that. It's like you don't need to account for law. You don't need to account for the principles of logic by positing a God who accounts for principal logic. You simply posit the principles of logic and be done.
Okay, well then I'll just posit a God.
Because the principles of logic are properly basic.
JD, based on that logic, I'll just postulate God, and we're done. The conversation.
Well, no, let's keep it back on.
If I may for a minute, can I hop in here? Okay. Okay, let's assume there is a God. Okay. Hey, there's a God. Okay, I'm going to say that. I'm not really believing it, but there's a God. Okay. What would that do? I mean, it seems that you have veered far from the topic, like far. Now I've been getting messages nonstop saying, "Oh, Eric, he veered away from science. He's veered away from science. I'm kind of tired of it. So,
yeah,
hey,
but
can I
Isiah,
veer it back a bit?"
Understand. This actually gets right on topic, because what have I been saying since the very beginning of the conversation? We are all looking at the same science. We're all looking at the same evidence.
Well, actually, we're not. There's a slight problem with that when you say we both have the same evidence. That's not actually possible if we're coming to different conclusions. We can have the same pool of facts that we're deriving evidence from, but evidence is something put forth in favor of a claim, and you're claiming something different, so it's got to be different evidence by definition. And the second thing is your model. Whatever. One second. The problem I find is that you're kind of discounting or ignoring the role that predictability plays in how we differentiate between good and bad models. Your model isn't making any strong predictions. It's not saying, well, there's all this where I'm going to predict that this is the case, and if it is, then my model is correct. And that just isn't what you see from creationists. You see a lot of it from every other scientific model, but you don't see it from
what you just stated is incorrect.
Well, I'm willing to be proved wrong. I've been wrong before.
I predict that if the creation model is true, that there should be thousands of symbiotic relationships. I predict that if there was a worldwide flood, we should find thousands of fossils buried in sedimentary rock layers all over the earth. I predict if there was a worldwide flood, we should find polystrata fossils all over the place.
Well, this is where it's important. If we don't find polystrate fossils, does that kill the model?
If that's the case, if he really did that, my prediction would be that there is no evolution from one kind to another kind. What we will see is variations within a kind, but not evolution. I predict that if creation is true, that the genetic makeup, the DNA, will actually be able to adapt to different environments, because God said, "Go and fill all the earth."
Okay, well, there's a problem though. Is that's not coming from your model? That's coming from you. That's things like that. These are post hoc things that we actually see already.
Well, now I can say
the biblical worldview is great and all, but what are these are inescapable conclusions of a literal reading of the Bible. These have to actually come from the model, not from just adherence of it. It's like just listening to Richard Dawkins say things like, "I think evolution should have lots of junk." That doesn't actually make it the case. That's just his opinion. It has to be derived from the model, which is why there's such a big hubbub that junk DNA. Dawkins said there'd be lots of junk DNA. There wasn't lots of junk DNA, therefore evolution's in trouble. Well, that's not actually the case, because that prediction is not a serious challenge the model. There are other things.
That's why I pointed out, and I'm sorry you haven't. I don't know if you've been listening to the whole time. I keep pointing out, evolution will be rescued every time. When Dawkins said there should be lots of junk DNA and there wasn't, they said, "Oh, well, that doesn't hurt evolution."
Because that was Dawkins'
prediction, isn't
predictions, not
as I just said. That's Dawkins. Not all serious predictions of your model have to come from the model. They have to come from the inescapable conclusions of the core propositions of the model. Now the problem with
hold it. You're trying to make it sound like evolution is the evolution theory, or this hypothesis is kind of its own thing apart from people. That is it's the way models are done in science. There are certain core propositions like mutation, natural selection, genetic drift, horizontal gene transfer. Now we ask the question: if this what are some inescapable conclusions of this? One of them is the tree of life. Chromosome number 2 is a more advanced one that is with a very specific thing. That when we find fossils of transitional forms, we should not find. It should be going in one direction. Like if we find humans below, where our common ancestors like to be, well, the model's crap. It's done for. And so we make predictions based on this. Just like, what should we necessarily see? What should we necessarily never see? And then we look for those things. Like the prediction that there would be, what was this one? Flightless fowl would be on any islands that are far from land and do not have any predators, because flying is difficult, and so there'd be a tendency to lose that ability. Well, that was predicted before anyone ever checked. Now, no creationist had ever predicted that, although they'll happily say,
well, that's a loss of information. Now that we've actually made the discovery, there's nothing beforehand. Creationists don't make any predictions beforehand, and anything that all the stuff you mentioned, if we found it, if it was disproved, you would still be a creationist. So it doesn't actually challenge your model.
Hey, here's where I say, go to creationtoday.org, do a search on out-of-place fossils.
Well,
there aren't any.
Yeah, they've already been explained.
Yes.
I think we're getting a little off topic. If that's okay.
Yes.
Isaiah, I mean, I know you really want to.
Okay.
I had slotted to be on here for 1 hour, and I've got another appointment. Can we continue? I'd love to continue the conversation, even though I know where it goes. I've had these conversations thousands of times. We all look at evidence, we come to different conclusions, and then I say, whose worldview can even account for the fact that we are observing these?
Well, that's irrelevant.
Yes. That's a philosophical question.
Yeah.
Right, it is, and that's where this has to go. Whose
no,
philosophy
it doesn't.
can account for this?
But, hold on. If I were to say, okay, there is a God, and it's the Christian God, would that automatically lead to the conclusion that, okay, evolution is not true, we are not related to chimps, and
if we posit, if you say the God of the Bible is real and the Bible is God's revealed word, then yes, evolution is not true. If that really is the case, then evolution would not be true.
No. We actually have someone in here who is Christian and does accept evolution.
Yeah, but
so
they're
holding
two
logical
contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time.
No.
A lot of people do that all the time. They hold contradictory ideas at the exact same time.
No.
That's called queer reasoning. But Jade Jade, go ahead and explain to him why you're not holding two different views, because you're a theist and you're also somebody who actually understands evolutionary theory.
I know Francis Collins. I know these guys that would make these claims. I'm not saying there are not guys that make these claims. I'm saying you're not getting that from the Bible. The Bible clearly does not teach the evolution worldview. Would you at least admit that?
The Bible does not teach science, period.
Well, but everywhere it talks about science, it's accurate.
No, it's not.
Where is the Bible inaccurate on a scientific perspective?
Bats are not birds, just to begin with.
Whoa. Now you're taking a modern classification system and applying it to the Bible.
That's correct.
Well, of course, because, I mean, if the Bible said cesium is a...
If I get the majority of scientists today to say that, something contrary to the Bible, then I can point to the Bible and say it's not true because the majority of scientists say so today. How do you know that the classification in the Bible of a bat, it's flying? Why wouldn't it call it a bird?
Well, because it doesn't have feathers, for one thing. I would think even the ancients knew that it had feathers.
Well, of course, so is the classification
of absurdity. It is so absurd to say because it doesn't have feathers, the Bible shouldn't have called it a bird, because here, 2,000 years later, we decided that it was only a bird if it had feathers.
Actually, I think you will find that the ancient Greeks knew what a bird was, and it had feathers, and that goes back thousands of years. That this isn't some new idea that birds have feathers. I assume the term is a different sort of term, a different sort of classification. Perhaps it's a classification of flying things. But how's your Hebrew?
If it called a whale a fish, you would say therefore the Bible's not true.
How's your Hebrew and your Aramaic?
Yeah, I'm taking Hebrew, but it's not too good.
Okay, so you can't really answer that question.
And we can call a whale a fish.
Question. I'm looking at the big picture. If the Bible called a whale a fish, would you say therefore the Bible is not scientifically accurate?
Yes.
That's absurd.
No, whales are not fish.
But
that's not relevant. That's not relevant. The Bible is not meant to be a science book. Shut up, JD. The Bible is not meant to be a science book.
Jade,
and even the early church fathers pointed out that they learned from two great books, the book of the Bible and the book of nature. That goes back to early Christianity.
Jade, just real quick. I mean, my only thing was I was saying that monophyletically, whale is a fish, but we accept that it's a paraphyletic clade because it excludes tetrapods. So I'm just clarifying for anybody who's listening that we can say that is a fish. We just generally don't because it excludes tetrapods. But go ahead.
Right. We don't go back to first clades. For example, we don't generally refer to ourselves as fish.
When did we stop going back to first clades? When did this very idea come up? That's where I go, you guys, come on. Would somebody please be honest instead of saying, yeah, if the Bible calls it a fish, therefore the Bible's not scientifically. You mean you're proposing a new idea, a new classification.
Please show me exactly where the Bible is a science book. Show me all the places where it tells us about science, because it's incorrect about a lot of things. If you're looking at it, wait. If you're looking at it from the point of view of science, for example, the cure for leprosy. If you're looking at that from a medical point of view, that's absolutely useless. If you're looking at that from a theological point of view, well, then this is perhaps a ritual that people went through for leprosy.
What's the cure for leprosy in the Bible?
I forget what it is, but it's a long-involved thing.
Are you talking about when Naaman went and bathed 7 times down in the water?
No.
No, there's some birds are burned during the passage.
Yeah, there's an actual list of things you have to do. That's not meant to be a medical. That's not meant to be a medical cure. Really, it's meant to be a ritual.
Well, it depends on if it's a miracle or not, or if it's a.
Yeah. No. We're talking about a regular cure for leprosy. If you have leprosy, as JD said, you're supposed to burn birds. I could look it up. I don't have it at the tip of my brain at the moment. There's a ritual that you go through, and it's allegedly to cure leprosy. It's not going to cure leprosy, but then that particular passage really isn't meant to be a medical text. It's not meant to be a cure from a medical point of view. It's meant to be a ritual, and so you can't say that that's.
Well, then you take it. Then you take it as a ritual. But when the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood, it's scientifically accurate. When the Bible says there are springs in the sea 2,000 years ago, it says this, and scientists just discovered it in 1970. It's scientifically accurate. When the Bible says the stars are uncountable, it's scientifically accurate. I mean, over and over and over. It is scientifically accurate. And that's what's
we knew there were springs in the sea before 1970. You are aware of the transatlantic cable, right? We had to lay down the transatlantic cable, and a lot of discoveries were made at that time. I think what you're talking about are the deep sea vents.
Correct.
We already knew that there were springs in the sea because divers went down and saw them. There are pearl divers, for example, in Japan and other places that have encountered them. So no, you're trying to be very specific and say only the deep sea vents refer to that springs in the sea, not the other springs in the sea, the upwellings of water that people have known of for probably thousands of years. So
do me a favor, just go to
creative.
Go to my website, creationtoday.com.
No, you should be able to answer these things. I'm not going to go to your website.
Okay.
I don't see any reason. You're here to answer questions. You should be able to answer the questions yourself. So why do you think that only the deep sea vents that were discovered in the 1970s refer to that rather than the springs in the sea that people have known about for probably thousands of years?
Well, my point is they have discovered deep springs in the sea. The Bible talks about this thousands of years ago. The Bible talks about the life of the
divers probably knew about this.
Where scientists thought that your blood was bad, you had to take it out. I mean, literally, you can go do a list of scientific facts in the Bible, and you're going to find tons of scientific facts in the Bible. So while
scientists did not think that your blood was bad and you had to take it out, they thought your blood was overheated.
It was called the doctrine.
And that by releasing some of it,
overheated, you would cool it down. You wouldn't put leeches and bleed you to take it out.
No, that's why they took it out. They thought by removing some of it, it would cool it down. It's the same thing they used to do with flensing. You know what flensing is? There were even flensing tools that doctors had. The idea was to release a certain amount of blood, and that would cool, by removing some blood, it would cool the blood. We've actually discovered there is some scientific evidence that flensing or removing blood in certain cases actually does help. It doesn't mean it helps in all cases, but that doesn't mean anything. You're going back to like medieval or Renaissance medicine. That's not particularly relevant to today. We didn't have the ability to do the kinds of experiments, and we didn't have the knowledge back then that we did now. So it's not particularly relevant. And there weren't even, by the way, scientists back then.
Let's stick to the topic of Genesis.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
So-
I think
Okay,
science
before-
has proven the universe had a beginning, and that to me is
Wait, it does?
a great
It
thing.
did?
Yeah, that's actually not the case.
Yeah, where did that happen? I'm just curious. I mean, if you have something to research, then I really am like cosmology as well as biology. So
Nice.
yeah, where if you have something that's proven the universe has a beginning, I'd love to read that paper because the only one I've seen demonstrates the mathematical probability of quantum fluctuation.
So what you're saying is the universe has always existed. The universe is eternal.
I'm not,
Well,
I
that
didn't-
actually that kind of depends on what model you use. The fact is, the classical model is wrong, as kind of everyone knows. They're just not sure exactly how it's wrong. The model's not complete yet. Quantum gravity hasn't been taken into effect yet. Well, I should say we don't have a good explanation of quantum gravity, and so the model's incomplete. What we do have are a lot of theoretical models. Some of them posit a universe as eternal in one way or two directions, or in some other way, and other ones that posit a boundary of some sort. We're not really
Let's
sure what
think
the
about
answer is.
evolution.
Right.
So did the universe?
It's an open question.
Okay,
That's my
wait.
point. It's not answered yet.
yeah. The simple answer is we don't,
We don't know. Correct.
So going back to
It'll be
evolution.
amazing when we find out, though. It'll really be.
No,
I'm looking
the
for any
honest
kind of
answer. That's not true. The honest answer is that the evidence seems to be supporting that there was a beginning. What we don't know if there were universes before this universe. That's what the evidence is, or the evidence is not available.
No, the evidence only can go back to the evidence actually doesn't even go back to the singularity. The
Correct.
singularity is proposed,
Correct.
so we can't go back further than that. So the answer is we don't know.
Yeah. Have you ever
No,
read?
the evidence is supporting is that Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose discovered that they can go back to a certain Planck time. What we don't know if there are universes like string theory or some sort of cyclic type ironic theory, or
String theory.
multiple different universes outside of this universe.
Okay. First of all, it's Planck.
So the answer is
Hold on a second. There's no reason for us to believe that there are multiple universes or that the universe is eternal, but the evidence does seem to be leading that the universe had a beginning. That's what you guys are confusing right here.
no, but the answer is still we don't know.
Correct.
Yes,
These are
there's
hypothetical.
evidence.
We don't
But
know if
we
the universe was
don't
eternal.
know.
Evidence seems to be leading
Let's,
to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning.
let's go back
But
to
again,
guest Eric. Mr. Eric.
We
Yeah,
don't
it's
know.
Can we get back to Eric because
Well, we do know that the universe seems to be, the evidence seems to be supporting that the universe had a beginning and start, but we don't know if the
Okay,
universe
let's-
is eternal. There's
yeah,
no
yeah,
evidence. in that
let's-
fact.
Guest.
Let's go back to Eric, and again, we don't know. So go ahead.
Unfortunately, that's not true.
So-
No, we do know. Again,
No,
Okay,
Kate-
we
Kate-
there's no
hammered that
evidence
point pretty hard,
supporting
guys.
what you guys are saying. What we do know is that the evidence is leading to the conclusion that the universe had a start.
Let's go back to
May
guest.
I say just one thing? True, that you're saying the evidence leads to a certain point. You're correct. The evidence may lead to a certain point, but we still don't know.
Right.
Doesn't make any difference
Yeah,
what
we
the
don't know
evidence.
if the universe. We do not know of any evidence that suggests that the universe is eternal. That's all conjecture. But the evidence is leading to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning or a start.
We do not know
Let's-
that.
How you want to
Let's address Mr.
I will
Eric.
solve
is that
this
based
for
on the
you
data
guys.
we have available, the
let's-
evidence seems to support that the
Guys.
universe. had
Okay,
a start.
Ronnie, you said that 5 times already. We got it.
I'm going to do you
Okay.
guys a big favor. You ready? I'm going to solve it for you. You guys can thank me later. Here it is. Here it is. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I have
That
solved it.
yeah,
I've got it
that
figured
was
out.
unexpected.
Exactly.
He's
Okay,
got us there,
let's-
guys. I don't think we need to look at this any further.
Yeah.
No, it's-
Science is done.
The science that we see is going to confirm exactly what that says every time.
And that does not invalidate evolution.
Or
That God
cosmology.
created the heavens and the earth does not invalidate the biological theory of evolution.
I don't think he said that he did.
I
Though.
don't,
That's-
I don't
that's-
think
that's-
I don't think he said that he did though. He's not on
Let's-
evolution
let's
right now. We're
go
talking
back
about.
to evolution.
Thanks.
I
Seriously.
will.
Let's-
My next appointment's waiting on me, so I got to head out. God bless you guys.
See you, Eric.
All right,
Ah.
Eric, hang on,
Goodbye,
Eric.
Eric.
Did Eric leave?
I think so.
I wanted to thank him for dropping in. I'm sorry that there was more people involved in this hangout than there probably should have been. But you know, it's very cordial of you to come in and at least talk to us about things. I hope to do this again, maybe with a smaller type thing, if that's okay, Eric. Maybe one of these days.
Agreed.
Yeah, it was great talking to you as well. It was very interesting.
So we should have kept it to evolution. That's one of the why I was trying to get in here. One of the criticisms I had, apart from JD did get it off topic, but that's no fault of yours.
Sorry. I followed the track he was going with. You know.
Yeah, I know. It's all good. It is a good way to pin someone down is when you're actually talking about a given topic. Provide biological definition references on what you're talking about, and then elaborate further. And then as you're doing so, then provide actual academic research and screen share, and then go through quickly, but also dumbing down quite well for the person to understand what you're going through. So like he did with true empiricism when it was me and him. Explained the definitions, screen shared and linked him research papers, and we went through it, and you could hear the gears click in his head, and he kicked me. So Eric wouldn't do that, but he could probably grasp the concepts much better. And when he says, "Oh, it's not a science," well, here's a multitude of different publications, reflecting that.
Well, I agree, but one thing we have to understand here, Eric is not a scientific person. He admits this, okay, and so we cannot hold him to a standard of a person who claims to know a little about science. And most of this will go over his head, and this is not a fault to him. However, there are certain things that are basal to everybody here, and I really like what going down what Isiah was trying to do with the Karma descent and things like that. As soon as he started going down to his presup, the theme was lost. Okay, because then we start getting into properly basic beliefs and is it justifiable and all that stuff, which we know that argument inside and out. We know Eric cannot have an argument on that, really. JD destroyed it, no offense. But
that's kind of why I went with it. I'm like, that is, the thing is, I think when it comes to the secular position, philosophy is our friend.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
There's a reason that some 70% of philosophers are outright, not lactheists, but atheists. Gods aren't a thing. And I think there's a reason for that, and that's because for a godless universe and all the things that fall from that are pretty strong. And I don't think presuppositional really puts any kind of dent into it. I was happy to go down that line with it.
Oh my fucking god! I think the cherry on top is that Ronald McDonald got a cameo in this fucking hangout.
Quick question.
I actually have no idea how he got the link.
That's what happens when you give low-hanging fruit like Joe the fucking link to stuff like this.
Yeah, that was. I don't know how the link got that out. I think that really kind of made everything go sideways. No offense.
And it was a welcome surprise to me. But you know how I am, though. So.
Yeah, no. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, but I would have liked to have kept it more on specific evolution topic because everybody here knows enough about the topic to really pinpoint him. But I think Isiah, when we made a critical mistake is when anybody makes a claim initially, okay. When he started talking about epigenetics, that's what you should have gone with initially, okay? Because he was saying that epigenetics seems to violate evolutionary theory. And then when we explained to him, no, it doesn't because it's incorporated in the modern evolutionary synthesis because it's just a change of alleles. And Rumpus knows this very well because we've had this discussion numerous times with Fiona. Yeah, so that's where we should have started. Wait a minute, this is already one mistake that you made and gone from there.
I mean, there was plenty of mistakes he made that I addressed, but I couldn't really, get.
Yeah, it
did. You're talking about Gulop. You think he knows what Gulop gene is, or he even cares?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I wish we could. But you're right that he doesn't get the science. So it wasn't the conversation wasn't going too far when you brought up the technical stuff because he didn't. And that's not his
problem.
Is
he doesn't know the science, does he? So if you tackle him on the science, he's in trouble because he doesn't understand it. So he simply says, "Oh well, I go and look at creation today. I don't quite understand that." Or then mash it up or something and simplify it, get confused, and then you have to spend half an hour explaining basic science to him. Whereas on the philosophy, it's got some sort of chance.
The Dillahunty dodge. That's what it is.
Yeah, and but I'm not faulting him for that. He's not a science person. He at least admits that. But when you start inundating people with technical stuff, you're going to lose them. It is not going to do any good.
Well, there is a catch to that, though, in that, he admits he's not scientifically particularly literate, but then he says, I don't really know much about evolution, but here's all the reasons why it's wrong. In which case, he can still like, well, hold on a sec. Here's people who have studied this stuff for a decade or two and have worked in the field, and you're telling them they're all wrong despite not really understanding not understanding the field. It's a bit arrogant, even if he admits arrogant or ignorance, and then goes on to make broad proclamations about the field entirely from presuppositions and theological positions.
Well, he'll bring up creationist scientists, but the problem with that is those creationist scientists are at least at a minimum 3 standard deviations from norm. Because if you go by 99.7% that accept evolutionary theory, that leaves 0.3. That literally is 3 standard deviations. So he has a handful of scientists that disagrees with the entire. I mean, 99.7%. That is insignificant when you factor in a couple dozen.
Yeah, he made an outrageous claim, didn't he? He said there are loads of creation scientists. And the other thing on the Bible thing, you can validate him. I mean, just the order in Genesis is completely wrong. So I thought the bats and the birds thing that's a classification issue, which you can argue. Well, they may not know the difference, but actually whether the Bible didn't offer a sort of just a term. Whereas you can say the Bible says that the earth and the stars and the fishes
plants.
and the people in a certain order, and you can say no, that is quite definitely wrong.
Yeah, like the plants coming before the sun. It's like, no.
Yeah.
And the whale fish makes no difference. The bat and bird is a bigger thing because they are not the same kind, according to him.
But let's get Turing Person back in here if we can.
No, if he goes in here, I'm leaving. I don't want to deal with
He's gone.
No idea.
Yeah, the fact that he got in
He's in the outside chat, but he's not.
Yeah, he's so incompetent that I don't care if he does it. I don't even care if he does or doesn't. But I'm just saying that we want to have an intelligent conversation with people that are intelligent. And I'm sorry, True doesn't qualify.
Don't apologize.
Oh, that reminds me. There was one rebuttal. There's one rebuttal I wanted to make to his bit about, the evidence seems to lead to, the universe having a beginning. Well, in the same way, the evidence leads to life having a natural chemical origin, but we don't know. I mean, if you're going to give one, you can give the other. But I doubt he would grant me that.
There is evidence that leads to the universe being infinite as well. There definitely evidence.
Yes.
That's why I kept saying we don't know. What part of we don't know doesn't he understand?
Yeah, the classical model definitely leads to a beginning, but it's the classical model which is wrong. It's not very helpful right now.
I mean, half the sort of Big Bang cosmologists think that the universe has been eternal. They think it's been coming in and out and bouncing around, and it is not established amongst cosmologists at the moment. I don't know what sort of percentage you might like, but something about 60% of them, 70% of them think they had a beginning. There's another 30% who have got all sorts of other ideas. It really isn't it isn't done and dusted.
Well, that reminds me like quantum. What's the main one in quantum mechanics right now? It's not many worlds. It's the one other than that. Do you guys know it?
Multiverse.
No, the one that's kind of got the most recognition right now.
Quantum fluctuations.
No, the name of the model that's the kind of the typically taught one in quantum mechanics.
Let's ask Isiah.
Like the Schrodinger or something like that. What is it?
Well, Schrodinger's name of a wave function, and there's quantum fluctuations, vacuum fluctuations.
No, like the typical model that they kind of teach everyone initially. That's wrong in like fundamental ways, but it's all we got right now. The Copenhagen interpretation. That's it.
Well, that's not to do with the universe. That's not to do with the universe. That's the way you interpret whether something's a wave or a particle.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Copenhagen interpretation is the one that still has most people applying to it. But I remember Sean Kerr pointed out, like, we all know it's wrong in some serious way, but it's like we don't have anything else. Well, that's the same way the classical model is. It's wrong in some fundamental way, but we don't. But it's still working well enough.
Yeah, you're right. There is a problem with it. And indeed, the multiverse is an alternative to the Copenhagen interpretation. Yes,
right.
But
if you're going to conclude anything, if you're going to conclude something based on the classical model, your conclusion is probably going to be wrong because the model's wrong. The conclusion there is like, well, based on this currently faulty model, sure, there's a beginning. That's wrong though in some way. There might be a beginning, but this isn't really going to get us there until we figure out quantum gravity.
Right. But with what Steve said, at least we won't have an echo chamber with Ronnie in here. I mean, he'll be a bit more engaging than, say, Eric. Or Eric won't jargon bomb the fuck out of us and not know what he's talking about. With T, I can't believe I'm trying to get T in here. Holy shit, what's wrong with me today? At least we can.
Maybe it's in the air or some shit.
I mean, you were quite generous to him, JD and Steve, and you were quite nice to Eric, and I think that was understandable. He makes some outrageous claims about loads and loads of creation scientists, and you didn't stomp on him, and I think that's possibly where he was allowed to get away with quite a lot. But you were nice to him. I thought that was probably right, but he was allowed to get away with stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I was civil with his dad too. I mean, so was Isiah, and so was Wayne. I mean, these are. I mean, we're not out to kick the shit out of creationists like that. I mean, we're not dogging on them. We just wanted to address the science. And unfortunately, this particular case, he doesn't really know the science because when we're talking about the speciation, I think he was completely lost.
Well, yeah, he started talking about kinds towards the end there. He said, well, we predict that, you wouldn't see kinds. Well, that's not a very useful prediction because we don't even know what a kind is.
Yeah, Steve, when you threw in that speciation thing, he didn't really understand what you were starting from. You needed to come at a lower level than you did to explain your argument there.
I think the most important point think the most important point was if we were to show exactly what he asked for, what he said would disprove creation, he would still be a creationist. There's always some way to say, well, sure, that's what I would originally have called a change in kinds, but that doesn't matter. It's just that passage is what that passage means. And you know what? I'm still a creationist, and it doesn't really, all the things he quote unquote predicted, falsify them all, and he's still going to be a creationist, which is something that people we tend to gloss over in these conversations. But the absence of predictability and the completely unfalsifiable nature of creationism means that there's just nothing you can bring to the table that's going to change their mind on that.
And JD, on the God thing, you could have said when he was saying about God was responsible for laws of logic, and you were saying that in fact there are probably basic beliefs, the most basic that we can do. You could have had him said, could God change the law of logic, and if not, therefore he is in fact subservient to them, and therefore he could be thrown out of the equation.
I was going to go there actually, but didn't get a chance to. I was actually going to go there.
Okay.
Just
JD, I gotta say, you fucked up playing this game of philosophy. Like, how do you know this? Now you know that. Like,
I like philosophy. You know,
I do too.
Okay.
I think that's not what Isiah was going down with this thing.
Yeah.
But
Seriously.
but he didn't even address what you said, and what you said was exactly true, JD. That if you have a properly basic belief, and then also you posit God in back of it, and you're trying to make that the properly basic belief, which I don't think you can do.
No, you can't.
Yeah, Bible. I mean, God is not a properly basic belief, but all he's doing is just moving He's moving the post. He's moving his properly basic belief from what I would say would be assumption of the universe to God. That's all he's doing. You don't need to have to justify your worldview, what as he calls it, to justify a properly basic belief because they're non-justifiable by definition.
And the thing is, God is less basic than P equals P.
Yes.
Exactly. So you don't justify a basic belief with something not as basic. That makes no sense.
And he's also subject to it as well. That's the key point. And if not, then he should supposedly be able to change it. If he's more basic than that, in theory, he should be able to change laws of logic, which, of course, we all know he bloody well couldn't.
Yeah, if you were to talk about the properly basic beliefs, JD, that would have been the key point to hammer home. How are you positing a God that is more basic than P equals P?
Well, JD said he was on the case. He was going there.
Yeah.
Well, I hit that one point. I didn't
got
continue.
He got Jade on his case.
Sorry, Jade. I didn't mean
Jade
to.
was terrifying there.
Yeah, he got the Jade.
With Jade.
She's like, crap!
Yeah, I did.
You're pumped that I'm starting to interrupt. You're like, no, you ain't going to interrupt me. Get your
It's like he took a two-pound dump. You know, it's like this is total shit. He's like,
who would like to meet Jade on Dark Street?
Yeah, did you guys see me get up and go and change my shorts after that?
Oh, that was beautiful, though.
Yeah, I did one of these like, okay, just back it up.
He's like, shut up, JD.
No, I'm not a pushover. Let's just say that.
This whole
One thing we can definitely say is that Eric was a good sport.
Oh yes,
he hung around longer than he needed to, and you know, he
was a bit naughty. He was a bit interrupted, though. I thought several times when Isiah was trying to make a point, and you too, and he wouldn't let you finish the point and get in there. He wasn't like Ronnie, but he was a bit naughty, I thought, and stopping and preempting some points being made.
I'll tell you this much: he's better than a sack of shit dad. I mean, well, they're both sacks.
I don't want to get like a name calling. Because we do engage with these people, Wolf. So I mean
who cares if they're gone? I don't care.
Well, we're so
but I care too. I think that.
But this is being recorded, Wolf. This is being recorded.
But the whole hangout
don't reflect yours. I'm just saying that. Okay, I don't respect people who sell cancer pills to patients. Okay, that's just me.
I mean, we all agree with you, Wolf, but we're on there.
But there are ways to do that are better than just calling people names. Although I know I am so tempted so many times to just call someone a name, and then I try to stop myself and think, is there a better way to go about this?
Yeah.
How many times did you say no to him, Jade? Did you say no? Then say something else. No.
but I got to tell you, the takeaway from this entire hangout, making the whole thing worth it, was just your comment to JD. Just shut up, JD. I'm never gonna forget that. That sound is resonating in my head and burning in my brain. Shut up, JD. I'm just never gonna. That is something I'll hear in my sleep.
She does it to scare bears away, I think.
Shut up, bear.
Hey, there's one within a mile of me.
I think tonight I'm officially handing over the talking shit reins to Jade. You can host the show. You're clearly better at it. I can't lay the smack down in so few words as you can, Dave. So
Fiona
you
did
and
that
Drag
to
can
me.
now host your. He's the official host. I've been told.
Jade, have you been in have you been worldwide wrestling? One of the many things you've done. Have you been in wrestling?
No, sorry,
Yeah,
never done wrestling. Never done wrestling.
Fiona did that to me, and I had the same reaction that JD had. Was just okay.
Yeah, it's like, oh fuck, she's out now. Let's back off. But one of the reason why I want to get fucking TE in here is just to ask him and pin him on why he hid that video and only edited so he could respond to Steve and just ditch the rest when he was talking to me.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm down for that too. I mean, he did. He basically, the point where you were asking, or you were giving him actual paper citations, which he doesn't know how to read. Then basically he just unbroadcast you and did the same thing. You know, muted and muted and booted. And then he just makes a video about me, which I fully trashed with MMA here and Fiona, because we went through his video and was like, this True doesn't understand that the video he makes himself look bad.
Look bad, yeah.
And I don't. He has no self-awareness of this.
Yeah.
It's like he started to read out the paper that I gave him back to me, and like I said before, you can hear the fucking clogged gears in his head twist and turn and crumble, and then he says, "Okay, let's go back to the other point I was making," and then he's like, "I'm going to give you one more shot to give evidence of fucking yada yada yada." And then as I'm reading the title of the next paper to prove that point, I'm fucking kicked. I'm like, nigga, what?
Are you talking about Eric?
No. If we could get him in here, I would like to ask him about that. And then kick him after that. Once we get an answer, just kick him.
No. I mean, he's whatever. I mean, do what you guys.
She's put it to you, but not me.
I
don't
care, even the fact that he's not going to give you anything that you want to hear.
I just feel left out. Like he responded to you and not me. I'm like, bitch.
Well, I'm special.
I know what we should do. We should flag him for harassment.
Yay! No.
Steve's getting all flustered just thinking about him.
Wait,
we're not special little snowflakes.
That's your opinion. Oh my God. Some people need to be fucking euthanized or something.
These special little snowflakes that think that they can put shit out there on the internet for people to criticize, and then when you do criticize them and say things, against them, whether it be personal or non-personal, it doesn't matter. You have a right to have a response to them.
Steve, you're triggering me, right? You're triggering me, man. This is harassment. This is not a.
Damn right.
Triggering right here.
I like harassment.
I'm going to go
He's
off
been
air.
flagged yet, Steve?
Isaiah's going off air.
What do you do?